My name is Isabella Carter, and I am telling you this story because silence is heavier than truth. I was born in the United States of America, in a blue-painted house on Maple Street in Savannah, Georgia. It wasn't a grand house, but it had wide porches, tall windows, and creaky floors that carried every whisper. My parents, Marie and Stephen Carter, were people of control and precision, my mother with her endless lists and my father with his fixed smile. My older sister, Lena, was their favorite melody, the one they played for guests and bragged about in town. I was the quiet note behind her tune, the one no one noticed until it stopped playing. Looking back, I suppose I should have sensed what they were planning. There were signs. Hushed conversations in the hallway, the lawyer who visited twice that spring, the sudden kindnesses from Lena that didn't quite fit her face. But love has a way of blinding you when you want to believe you are safe. I was 27, working part-time at a small bookstore by the river, dreaming of traveling to Europe someday, of seeing London's fog and Paris's bridges. My parents told me one morning that they were taking us on a family trip, something simple, something coastal. I didn't question it. I packed light, 2 dresses, a sweater, my mother's old watch, and my journal. We left Savannah early in the morning. I remember the road unfurling like a ribbon, the scent of pine and salt growing stronger as we approached the coast. My father rented a small boat in a town near St. Augustine, Florida, and we sailed toward what he called a private retreat. The island came into view as the sun climbed higher, a strip of sand and palms with no sign of houses or people. I felt a strange tug of unease, but when I asked, my mother smiled too quickly. "Just for a night," she said. "A little piece away from the world." When we reached the shore, they unloaded a few supplies, some fruit, a jug of water, a small tent, and then said they had to go back to fetch more. My sister kissed my cheek, her lips cold. "Don't wander off," she said. "We'll be right back." They never returned. Hours passed. The boat grew smaller on the horizon until it vanished into the glare. I waited on the beach until the tide rose and erased their footprints. The sun burned my shoulders, and I realized, slowly and horribly, that this wasn't a mistake. I was alone. The first night was the longest of my life. I built a weak shelter out of branches and palm leaves, listening to the endless hiss of the sea. My stomach twisted with hunger, but fear was stronger. I thought of home, the smell of coffee, the sound of my mother's heels on the floor, and tried to pretend this was a dream I could wake from. When dawn came, I cried until there was nothing left inside me. Days bled into each other. I learned to climb palm trees for coconuts and break them open with a sharp rock. I gathered rainwater in large shells and leaves. My hands blistered, my feet cracked, and my skin peeled under the relentless sun. I carved small notches into a piece of driftwood to keep track of time, one line for each day I survived. I counted 32 in total, though each one felt longer than the last. Nights were the worst. The island was alive in the dark, the scrape of crabs, the call of unseen birds, the whisper of waves that seemed to speak in my parents' voices. Sometimes I thought I heard a boat engine far away and would run to the shore, waving a branch, shouting until my throat went raw. Nothing ever came. I told myself stories to stay sane. I told myself I would return home, stand at the door of my blue house, and make them look at me, make them see what they had done. It's strange, but even in those desperate moments, I didn't hate them. Not yet. I tried to believe there had been some mistake, that maybe the boat sank or they were stranded somewhere else. It was easier to hold on to hope than to face the truth that my family had abandoned me for money. I whispered my own name to keep it from fading. Isabella Carter. I'd say aloud, "Savannah, Georgia, America." Sometimes I added, "You will live." It became a kind of prayer. By the 3rd week, I was thin and sunburned, my clothes torn. I spoke to the wind like it was a friend. I built a small fire each evening with driftwood and dry grass, though keeping it lit was nearly impossible when storms rolled in. I started to dream about the past, the bookstore, my walks by the river, the man who used to bring me coffee and ask about the latest novels. I thought of Europe, the train rides I had planned to take, the old cathedrals I'd marked in my guidebook. I told myself that if I ever made it off the island, I would go. I would leave the ghosts of Savannah behind. On the 32nd morning, the sky was gray and heavy with rain. I almost didn't light my fire that day. I was too weak, too tired of hoping, but something in me refused to give up. I stacked the wood and sparked the flame. When the rain began, I shielded myself with my body, coughing from the smoke. Then, through the curtain of mist, I saw a speck moving on the water. At first, I thought it was another illusion. I blinked hard, heart pounding, but the speck grew larger, steadier. It was a boat. A small fishing boat with a chipped red hull. I ran to the shore, waving both arms, shouting until my voice broke. "Here, please." The boat turned, slowly at first, then faster, cutting through the surf. The captain was a broad-shouldered man with weathered skin and kind eyes. Jack Rivera, he said his name was. "How long have you been out here?" he asked, disbelief in his voice as he hauled me aboard. I couldn't answer. My lips trembled, my throat dry. His deckhand, Maya, wrapped a towel around me and handed me a cup of water. I drank in small sips, afraid it might vanish like a dream. Jack looked at me for a long moment, then said softly, "You're safe now." I cried then loud, shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep inside me. The sound startled even me. It was the first human comfort I had felt in more than a month. Maya brushed my hair from my face and murmured, "You're all right, sweetheart. You're going home." Home. The word felt strange on my tongue. I didn't yet know that my home was gone, that my family's greed had burned everything to ashes. I only knew that the nightmare of the island was over. The sea, which had once seemed endless and cruel, now carried me toward salvation. As the boat turned toward the mainland, I watched the island fade into the fog. It looked small now, almost harmless. But I knew it would live inside me forever. A wound shaped like betrayal, a lesson carved by survival. I closed my eyes and let the salt wind wash over me. My story, I realized, was not ending. It was only the beginning. When Jack's boat touched the dock in Jacksonville, I felt the ground sway beneath my feet, as if my body had forgotten how to stand on something that didn't move. The air smelled of oil, fish, and rain-soaked timber. Jack helped me down the ramp, his strong hand steady on my arm. "You're safe now," he said again, though his eyes showed doubt, as if safety was a thing too fragile to promise. He drove me to a small marina office where I used the clerk's phone to call Nancy Miles, a lawyer my father had once trusted. Her voice on the other end trembled when she heard mine. "Isabella, where have you been? You're on the missing persons list, everyone thought." She stopped herself, then said quietly, "Come home, dear. Come to Savannah. I'll explain everything when you get here." Jack offered to drive me himself. "You don't look ready for a bus ride," he said, glancing at my thin arms and salt-stiff hair. I tried to protest, but the truth was, I didn't have the strength to argue. His old truck rattled like a tin can as we crossed the state line, the windows down to let the sea air in. We spoke little. I watched the highway blur past, gas stations, pine trees, fields of brown grass bending in the wind. At one point, Jack asked softly, "What'll you do now?" I said, "I don't know. I just need to see my house." He nodded once, as if that answer was enough. By the time we reached Maple Street, it was night. The streetlights cast weak circles of yellow over the wet pavement. The air carried a faint metallic scent, something like burnt wood. I didn't recognize it then for what it was. Jack turned off the engine, and silence fell like a weight. "You sure you're okay?" he asked. I nodded, my heart thudding painfully. I thanked him and pressed $200 into his glove box when he wasn't looking. Then I opened the door and stepped out into the dark. At first, I thought we had come to the wrong place. The house I had grown up in, the blue house with white shutters, the porch swing that creaked in summer, was gone. Only the brick steps remained, red and bare, leading up to nothing but air. The garden was black ash. The old oak trees stood like silent witnesses, their limbs heavy with soot. The air still carried the ghost of smoke. I walked forward slowly, each step sinking into soft gray dust. My breath caught in my throat. "Isabella?" A voice came from behind. I turned to see Peter Lang, our neighbor, holding a flashlight. His face was drawn and pale. "There was a fire," he said quietly, shining the light toward the ruins. 2 weeks ago. It spread fast. Electrical, they think. "I'm so sorry, Isabella." "Who?" My voice cracked. "Who was inside?" He hesitated, then said, "Your parents. And your sister." The world tilted. For a moment, I couldn't hear anything. Not the wind, not the crickets, not my own heartbeat. I sank to my knees, my hands pressing into the ash. The cold realization struck me all at once. If I hadn't been stranded on that island, I would have been here. I would have died with them. My body trembled, torn between grief and horror. Somewhere deep inside, an old, buried anger began to stir. Peter stayed beside me until the first hint of dawn. He offered me a spare room, but I refused. I couldn't bear the thought of being inside someone else's house. Not yet. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the curb, staring at the empty lot that had once held my entire life. The sky turned pale gray, and the smell of burnt wood faded into the scent of dew and morning. I felt hollow, like the world had been scraped clean around me. Just after sunrise, a car pulled up, a silver sedan I recognized immediately. Nancy Miles stepped out, dressed neatly in a gray suit, her hair pinned back as if the morning's tragedy couldn't touch her. Yet her eyes softened when she saw me. "Isabella," she said, kneeling beside me. "I'm so sorry." "I can't imagine." I shook my head. "What happened?" "The official report says faulty wiring." A spark behind the old piano ignited the wall. The fire spread fast. "They didn't have a chance." Her voice faltered for the first time. Then she drew a breath. "But, Isabella, there's more you need to know. Let's go to my office." I followed her numbly, the seatbelt cutting against my ribs as we drove through Savannah's waking streets. The world seemed unchanged, people walking dogs, shops opening, sunlight glinting on church spires. But everything I had known was gone. Nancy's office sat in an old brick building by the river. The moment I stepped inside, the smell of coffee and paper hit me, oddly comforting after the raw scent of smoke. She guided me to a leather chair and poured a glass of water. "Isabella," she said gently, opening a folder on her desk, "your parents updated their will a few months ago. There are some unusual changes." She handed me a copy of the document. I read it slowly, the words blurring as my eyes filled with tears. The clause was clear. If Isabella Carter cannot be located or contacted within 30 days of the testator's death, all property and assets shall pass to their surviving daughter, Lena Carter. My hands shook. "So that's why they left me there," I whispered. "They wanted me gone long enough for her to inherit." Nancy didn't answer. Her silence was answer enough. "They tried to kill me," I said, the words tasting like metal. "They left me on that island to die." Nancy placed a steady hand on mine. "I don't know what evidence there is of intent, but the timing, the change in the will, it all fits too neatly. I've already started the legal process to transfer what remains of the estate to you. You're the sole surviving heir now." Sole surviving. The phrase echoed through me like a bell. My family's cruelty had destroyed them. If fate, or perhaps irony, hadn't stranded me apart from them, I would have burned in that house too. The thought made my skin crawl. I wasn't sure if I felt grief or grim relief. Maybe both. Nancy explained that most of the house insurance had been claimed already, but there were still the bank accounts, the stock portfolio, and the land itself. "It's all in your name now," she said. "Roughly $1 million in total value. You'll need to decide what to do next." I stared out her window at the slow brown water of the river, the reflection of sunlight moving like fire across it. I thought of the island again, the salt air, the hunger, the endless silence, and realized it had prepared me for this moment. I had already learned how to live with nothing. Money now felt almost meaningless. Still, I couldn't ignore the strange sense of justice in it all. My parents had tried to erase me for wealth, and now that same wealth sat in my hands. I didn't know what to feel. The world had balanced itself in a way that was both cruel and precise. As I left Nancy's office, the sun was high, burning through the last morning mist. Savannah bustled around me, cars passing, children laughing, the hum of life continuing as if nothing had changed. I stood at the edge of the street, clutching the folder against my chest. Behind me, the city carried on. Ahead, Maple Street waited, empty but mine. I didn't yet know what I would build there or who I would become, only that I had survived again. The fire had taken my family, but it had also burned away the last of their lies. All that remained was the truth. I was alone, but I was free. The morning after I signed the final papers, Savannah felt quieter than I remembered. Even the river seemed to move more slowly, its brown surface heavy with secrets. I walked along the edge of the docks, my shoes crunching over salt-dried boards, and tried to make sense of what had become my life. In 1 month, I had gone from the forgotten daughter to the last living Carter, the heir to everything my parents once guarded with suspicion. When I returned to Nancy Miles's office, she greeted me with a cup of coffee and a stack of folders thick with numbers. "You're the legal owner now," she said, sliding one file toward me. "It's time to see what that means." Inside were account summaries, property titles, and a list of investments, mutual funds, savings bonds, and a few stocks in companies I had never heard of. The total balance came to $1,007,842. Seeing all those digits lined up neatly across the page made me dizzy. That number had once been the reason my parents plotted against me, and now it was mine, without joy or victory attached. I stared at the paper. $1 million, I whispered. "What am I supposed to do with this?" Nancy smiled softly. "Whatever you choose. But first, you'll need an accountant you can trust. I recommend Marcus Reed. He's careful, discreet, and not easily impressed." Marcus's office was 2 blocks away, above a bakery that smelled of sugar and cinnamon. He was a tall man in his 40s with kind eyes and an expression that never rushed. He listened as I told him everything, how I'd been left on the island, how I came back to find only ashes, how the inheritance felt more like a curse than a gift. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he folded his hands and said, "Money carries memory. Sometimes you have to scrub it clean before you can use it." He helped me close my parents' joint accounts and open new ones in my name. We moved the trust funds into a single account labeled simply Isabella Carter Estate, nothing more. He explained taxes, investments, and the importance of patience. "Don't build yet," he advised. "You're grieving. Wait until the dust settles, literally and otherwise." But I couldn't wait. The lot on Maple Street haunted me every night. In my dreams, the ashes stirred, whispering my name. I needed to see something rise from that emptiness, something living. So I ignored Marcus's caution and hired Olivia Hart, a contractor known for rebuilding fire-damaged homes. Olivia was brisk and fearless, with streaks of silver in her dark hair and the posture of a woman who had carried more than her share of burdens. When I showed her the charred foundation, she crouched down, ran her fingers over the bricks, and said, "This place can stand again. It'll take time, but the bones are good." For weeks, I worked alongside her crew. We cleared debris, sorted through fragments, and filled dumpsters with the remains of my past, scorched picture frames, melted silverware, shards of my sister's mirror. Every piece carried a story, and every story burned my fingers. Some nights I drove back to the river and watched the lights flicker on the water, wondering if survival always demanded such loss. During that time, I often visited the cabin in Asheville that my father had bought years before. Nancy said he purchased it as a retreat, though I doubted he ever spent a single night there. The first time I saw it, the red door stood out against the green hills like a heartbeat. Inside, it smelled of cedar and old books. The windows framed the mountains like paintings, the kind of view that made silence feel like a friend. I spent a week there sorting through boxes labeled with my father's handwriting. Most contained tax documents, business letters, and dull records. But one evening, in the bottom of a drawer, I found a small black ledger bound in cracked leather. My father's initials, DC, were pressed faintly into the cover. I opened it and froze. Inside were pages of financial notes, dates, transfers, and names. One entry caught my eye. Private withdrawal, $75,000, Lena. Another line followed, dated the same week I disappeared. Offshore transfer undisclosed. My pulse quickened. The handwriting was rushed, as if he hadn't expected anyone to see it. The last page stopped mid-sentence, a final note scrawled in fading ink. Isabella must never, and nothing after. I sat there in the fading light, staring at those unfinished words, realizing that whatever plans my parents had made, they hadn't ended cleanly. Perhaps the fire hadn't been an accident after all. When I showed the ledger to Nancy, she pursed her lips. "It's not enough to prove anything," she said, "but it explains their fear. If someone else was involved, someone expecting money, your survival might have interrupted that plan." The thought chilled me. I had escaped one death, but maybe another had been waiting in the wings. Back in Savannah, the rebuild moved forward. Olivia's team laid new foundations, and for the first time, I could imagine life returning to Maple Street. The neighborhood children waved when I came by. Peter Lang brought me lemonade and stories about how the street used to smell of jasmine in spring. I promised him it would again. Yet even as the house began to take shape, the ledger's shadow lingered. Some nights, I caught myself checking locks twice, or waking from dreams of flames crawling up walls. Money might build walls that didn't lie, but it couldn't silence the ghosts behind them. Marcus called one afternoon with news. "Your accounts are stable," he said. "The investments your father made are still yielding dividends. If you want, I can arrange for part of the funds to go toward community projects." The idea startled me. "You mean give it away?" He chuckled softly. "Sometimes generosity is the cleanest kind of revenge." That night, I wrote my first check, a $10,000 donation to the Savannah Firefighters Fund. I sealed it with shaking hands. The irony wasn't lost on me. Fire had taken everything, but fire had also shown me who I was without them. By the end of the month, the walls of my new house stood tall against the sky. The frame smelled of fresh pine, not smoke. I stood in the half-finished doorway and looked out at the street, the same one I had walked barefoot as a child. For the first time, I felt something like peace. Not happiness, not yet, but the quiet certainty that I had survived every plan made against me. I had been left for dead, robbed, and forgotten. Yet here I was, holding the ledger of their lives in my hands. It wasn't just a record of their greed anymore. It was proof of my endurance. They had written my name out of their story, but I had found a way to write it back in, and this time, the ink was mine. I went back to Maple Street on a clear Monday morning. The city trucks had finished clearing the debris, and the lot where my family's house once stood looked bare and bright, like a blank page waiting for ink. I stood on the old brick steps, the only survivors of the fire, and placed my hand on their warm surface. "I am still here," I whispered. The words felt small but solid, like the first stones of a new foundation. With the help of Olivia Hart, I designed a new house. Nothing grand, but honest. A 2-story white house with wide windows, a deep porch, and a kitchen where every flame would be watched. I asked for a library too, a quiet room filled with light where I could keep my father's ledger and my mother's photo, not as curses, but as reminders. Marcus Reed managed the finances with his usual calm precision. I paid every worker fairly, signed every check myself, and kept each receipt in a labeled envelope. This time, nothing would be hidden in ledgers or lies. As the frame rose from the cleared earth, neighbors began to stop by. Peter Lang, who had stood beside me the night of my return, brought lemonade in mason jars and helped paint the fence on weekends. Maya, the young deckhand who'd pulled me from the sea, drove all the way from Jacksonville with a basket of peaches and a laugh that filled the empty yard. Even Jack Rivera sent a postcard from his fishing route off Key West. It said only, "Water carries and saves." I taped it to the refrigerator as a promise to remember where I had come from. The rebuilding took months, but I didn't rush it. Each beam, each wall, each coat of paint felt like a sentence in the story of my survival. Sometimes I worked beside the crew, hammering nails until my arms ached. Other times, I sat on the steps at sunset and listened to the cicadas rising from the grass. Savannah summers are loud, full of sound and scent, the hum of life pushing forward no matter what it has lost. I began to breathe in rhythm with it again. Still, there were nights when sleep slipped away. I'd wake to the faint smell of smoke that wasn't really there, or the echo of my sister's voice calling my name across dark water. The memories of the island and the fire lived inside me like twin ghosts, one of loneliness, one of survival. But they no longer frightened me. They reminded me that I had been both lost and found. When the house was finally complete, Olivia handed me the keys with a grin. "You built this with your own willpower," she said. "You didn't just rebuild a house, Isabella. You rebuilt yourself." Her words stayed with me. I stood beneath the new doorway, sunlight pouring through the open windows. The paint smelled fresh, the floors gleamed, and the air carried a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I spoke aloud to the empty rooms, not for anyone else to hear, but for myself. "I lived," I said. "I was meant to be gone, but I lived. If I had been home that night, I would have died with them." The thought still struck hard, but it no longer hurt the same way. It was a truth I carried like a stone in my pocket. Heavy, real, grounding. That accident, that betrayal, that cruel twist of fate had also saved me. I am Isabella Carter, daughter of Stephen and Marie, sister of Lena, survivor of a deserted island and resident once again of Savannah, Georgia. My name is written on every deed, every account, every line of the new ledger. I am the sole heir to what was once my family's million-dollar dream, but money no longer defines me. What matters is this: I came back. I built something new from the ashes. I learned that survival isn't luck, it's choice. I chose to keep breathing, to keep walking, to come home. And when I look at my house now, glowing white against the Georgia dusk, I see not tragedy but proof that even in the fiercest fire, something within us refuses to burn.